putting it on live. All right, so we are good to get started. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce the topic for today, and also to welcome all of you that are not familiar with Academics in Conversation. Academics in Conversation is basically like a live podcast between the executive members of Accepted Society with Accepted Consulting, and then we have about a 20-30 minute conversation between the two of us, and then we close off the live, and then we have a conversation with our members at Accepted Society, so that way we can discuss these topics candidly. This is a space where we want to be able to discuss things that are perhaps a little bit touchy or difficult to discuss in kind of general academic spaces. So today we're going to talk about the idea of motivation versus discipline. I personally was the one who came up with this topic because I saw a lot of kind of discourse around this filtering on TikTok in particular, and especially with current conversations around hustle culture and toxic positivity and kind of like anti-production culture. I wanted to bring up a topic that can allow us to think a little bit more nuanced about how it is that we see productivity and what we think of when we think of the word motivation. I get asked a lot how it is that I stay motivated throughout the various tasks that I have got on my plate, from being a PhD student to being a business owner. And my answer is often it's not about motivation. And I want to get into the crux of like, what do I mean when I say that it's not motivation and it's primarily discipline. So we're going to really get into the nitty gritty today, and that's kind of a general introduction of the topic, but we're going to get started. So I'm going to go ahead and ask Danielle, or actually ask the group, how many of you struggle with always being quote unquote motivated? Say I. Pretty much everyone. I think that this like idea of motivation is something that we all collectively struggle with in various ways. And also there's this kind of discourse around it that says that like, if you love the thing that you're doing, you should be motivated 100% of the time, which is just like BS. Doesn't work out that way. So we're going to kind of get into it, but I'm going to hand it off to Danielle to talk a little bit about the differences between motivation and discipline.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. For those that don't know me and everyone watching on YouTube, my name is Dr. Danielle Lawson. I co-founded Accepted Society, specifically under the umbrella of Accepted Consulting with Kaylin. But I'm going to bring a little bit of the nerd side here right now and talk about the differences between motivation and discipline. It's something that I talk about in the general ed courses that I teach even right now. So when we think about motivation, there are two different ways to classify motivation. You have like intrinsic, so internal motivation, versus extrinsic, so external motivation. And a lot of times people think about when people are asking that question, like Kaylin posed, how do you stay so motivated? People are really talking about that like intrinsic internal motivation. So you don't have this like outside force that is asking you to do it. You don't have your parents, you don't have an advisor if you're in grad school, a spouse, you name it, someone trying to motivate you. And the thing about that is that like research shows us like we can't be motivated internally all the time. Like we actually don't have the mental capacity and mental space for it. And so a lot of times it's about what Kaylin was saying is like discipline. So discipline is like having the routine and like knowing that even if you don't want to do something, you are doing it. And that's the difference here. So it's changing this conversation away from the fact that you're not always going to be like motivated internally to do it. And instead you have to rely on the fact that even when I don't want to do things, that I still do it, because our brains literally cannot be motivated all the time. So for everyone who raised their hand, if anyone who's watching and didn't, since I know there's a little bit of a delay here on YouTube, anyone who's watching and is like, I'm not motivated all the time, you're not abnormal. You're actually functioning exactly how we should as humans. And we are not going to be motivated all the time at all. And something that's important with that is our personal experiences with motivation versus discipline. Kaylin, can you talk a little bit about your experiences right now at the stage of life that you're in? And then I can kind of talk about it as well.
Yeah. So one thing that Danielle and I were actually having a conversation about the other day was that the way that discipline manifests itself or motivation manifests itself in your daily life changes depending on what life stage you're at. And when I was a professional athlete, back when I used to ride horses professionally, I would say I was like at the utmost level of discipline. I used to ride 10 horses a day, and then I would get home, I would go straight to the gym. I would come home after that, shower, eat, take a 20-minute nap, and then I would stay up until like 1 a.m. doing my community college coursework. So, in my opinion, that was like probably one of the most quote unquote productive times in my life. And it didn't feel that challenging because my mindset around it was very different. And to be fair, the physical activity component of it is also very different than the kind of mental component of being a student or being somebody that is in the academy and trying to get on the tenure track. So I was having a conversation with Danielle about this last week, that if I was able to do that a couple years ago, if I was able to push my body to be able to do those things, it was largely about mindset. It wasn't just about the kind of stamina. So yes, it was physical stamina, but at the end of the day, the only way that you can physically push your body to various limits is being able to mentally keep yourself in check and keep a routine and think about how it is that you're using your muscles and how it is that you're training. And academia, while it's a different muscle and it's a different way of doing things, it's not physical in the same way, it is still using a muscle. Your brain is another element to your muscular makeup as a human being. And so for the last year or so, especially as a PhD student, I've been on top of everything, but I felt very much like I'm just getting by. Like I am just getting the things done that I need to get done. And one thing that I've been wanting to change about my kind of daily routine is thinking a little bit less about like just getting things done and trying to think about how it is I can set up systems and a degree of discipline that allows me to feel like I am on top of everything and that I'm excelling at the things that I really want to be doing. And also to keep in mind that I'm the one who entirely made the decision to go into academia. I'm the one who decided to end my professional athletics career in order to pursue this. And so if I was able to dedicate myself to that, I can dedicate myself to this in a similar way. And certainly there are days when I just want to sit on the couch and I don't want to do anything, like my back hurts or I'm tired or whatever it may be. And thinking about some tips and things that we can do in order to kind of motivate that disciplined side of your brain, and saying, you know what, I really want this. And even though I am tired and I don't really want to be doing work right now, I, in the long term, want this payout. And so therefore I'm going to get up, I'm going to sit at my desk, I'm going to get the work done. It's the same thing like with YouTube as well. Like I try my best to get 2 videos out a week. And so there are certainly nights when I do not want to sit at my computer and edit. I just want to go to bed. And in many cases, there are times when I let myself do that. I let myself take the night off. But there is a difference between listening my body and knowing when it actually needs to rest and when I actually need to push myself. And so we'll talk a little bit about that, like, because it's a thin line. Like it is a very thin line between the difference between listening to your body and needing to push it sometimes. But what about you, Danielle?
No, I would agree with you absolutely, Kaylin, that a lot of times it's all about knowing, well, let me rephrase. It's about knowing where that thin line is at for you, right? That you're referencing. So one of the things that Kaylin and I talk about a lot is how discipline looks very different for each person and at each life stage. And I want to say that that's okay, particularly for anyone who's here, anyone who's listening. For example, most people know that Kaylin and I are really good friends. That's why we started this. We work together all the time, but her and I are in very different life stages. She's a PhD student. She's living by herself and she has a business and is an influencer and stuff like that. And she's just at that stage of life. I'm in the stage of life where I've transitioned into being a professor and I don't think I'm going to be leaving Penn State anytime soon. And I'm married. And so because of that, it's not that any of our life stages are better than the other. We're just in different life stages and we have different priorities and things that we have to attend to. Another thing too is that I am 5 years older than Kaylin, which doesn't sound like much, and it's not when it comes to our friendship. But then it comes to a point where it's like I can't pull the whole like all-nighters anymore that I used to. We laugh about that all the time because Kaylin's like, you're leaving me. And it's like, because I won't function tomorrow if I don't leave you. I am sorry. But, you know, that's the thing. Like, part of my discipline is staying disciplined to take care of myself as well and finding that balance, because I'm no longer in this stage of my life where I'm like, okay, the next 6 years I have this and I'm going to be a student for the next 6 years and it's temporary. And then I'm going to find something else. And that's been hard for me to change my mindset and be like, okay, I'm here for like the long game right now, like until something comes up. So I have to find a way to not burn myself out. So I've had to learn to be disciplined in making sure that I'm taking care of myself, also attending to the fact that like I have a wonderfully supportive spouse, but you know, I still have to be a good wife in the sense that I want to be, and attend to both like our relationship and the way that works for us. So your discipline is going to change as you change your life stage, and that's okay. It's just like, you know, I joke all the time about like when I was an undergrad, I'm coming like, you know, we came home from a social outing at 9 p.m. the other night. And we're like, oh, we're start winding down for the night. But when I was an undergrad, that's when I was starting to wind up for the night, not wind down. And so like your life stages change, and that's like 100% okay. And I think it's important to talk about this because there is something that, well, there's just a culture in academia that breeds this idea that you, one, must be motivated 24/7. And if you're not motivated, you're the single person not motivated. Kaylin and I had a conversation with someone a few hours ago about the fact that we are not motivated all the time. And it also seems to breed this idea that academia comes before everything else in your life. Like your identity is an academic and that is it. And there might be people listening here that that's all they want to identify themselves as, and that is 100% okay. But Kaylin and I have conversations a lot, and I have conversations with my colleagues a lot about the fact that a lot of the culture in academia can be very toxic in nature. I mean, I'm sure most of us have heard here about the term like publish or perish. That's like the, you know, grad school tenure track term. But then there's also versions of that at every stage, whether you're a community college student or you're a student who's transferring, or you're an undergrad, or you are a master's student, post-grad, med student, you know, PhD student, you know, you name it. There's some version of this like publish or perish idea that you should be dedicating everything you have all the time to this mission of the academic lifestyle. Once you get through this publish or perish, it's tenure track, and you should be going for tenure and becoming a full professor. If you were getting your PhD, it's not going into a alternate academic career, right? Not becoming a professor. There's something that exists about that. And I would say that a lot of the newer generation of academics, in terms of like newer junior faculty, so pre-tenure faculty, are starting to kind of change this conversation, because they're pushing back on this idea that we no longer can survive being this whole like, I'm going to give myself to the academy and that's it. It's also because standards in the academy have changed over the years, and what it takes to be a successful academic 20 years ago looks completely different today. So I think it's something important that it's a good conversation that we need to continue having. Kaylin, do you have some perspectives that you'd like to add from like your position as a current PhD student?
Yeah, so there was something that you said that made me think of, there are different stages in your academic career in particular where you have to treat it like a sprint, or in others where you need to treat it like a marathon. Like if you are on the tenure track, it is a marathon. Like you've just got to make sure that you know how to keep pace and that you can still hit your marks, but that you are not burning yourself up in the first lap or the first mile. And then there are other stages, like when you are preparing for comprehensive exams, for example, where like it's a sprint, like you're reading 10, 12 books a week in order to hit that 350 book mark. And it's still outrageous to me that a comprehensive exam list is anywhere from 250 to 350 books, but we'll leave it at that.
I still have some PTSD from comprehensive exams, admittedly.
Yeah, well, we're heading into that stage right now, so that'll you guys can follow along that journey on YouTube. However, when you're thinking about like how it is that you need to quote unquote stay disciplined, it varies depending on whether you're at a sprinting stage or you're at a stage where you need to treat it like a marathon. And the way that you set up your goals and markers also have to be different, because you have one thing that's often commented on about entering a PhD program is that your markers of success are they're a much more infrequent. Like as soon as you're done with coursework, your ability to receive like outside validation for your work becomes a lot more limited. It becomes down to like when you meet with your advisor or when you go to submit the dissertation and then you go defend, which is like years into the future. And so the way that you used to potentially like keep your momentum going is going to change depending on what stage you're on in your academic career. Because in undergrad, I mean, you'd get your assignment you'd get your final grade by the end of the quarter or the end of the semester. So your markers of success are a lot more frequent. And so you have that to kind of keep you going. And so undergrad's much more like a consistent sprint. So you have sprint, take a break, sprint, take a break. But as a PhD student, and when you enter the tenure track, it is like go for a long jog, and then you hit this marker, and then maybe take a day or two off. Like you don't really get the same type of reprieve. And so you have to think about like the way that you're pacing out your sleeping and the types of rest that you're getting and the way that you're able to like kind of instigate motivation. A couple of things that like I will do is, I mean, people talk all the time about switching your environment, and that's kind of standard. But looking at other type of tips for success that will like actually work for you and the way that your brain functions, thinking about both long-term and short-term goals. We here with Accepted Society and the Accepted Society members have these monthly planning sessions. And we also want you to think, like, even for our members, we want to think about the accountability workshops and other services that we offer or other events that we put together as ways for you to kind of keep that momentum going with the assistance of other people, and thinking about accountability and other types of actual like tactical tips, using things like time blocking and putting things on your calendar. Danielle and I were talking about this earlier, like actually setting a date with yourself or setting a date with somebody else. Like Danielle and I have on our calendars, like I set it up on my calendar and sent her a calendar invite for the time that we were going to go ride our Peloton tomorrow. And having those, like having it as a serious date on your calendar or in your planner as something that you have to stay accountable to, like it is an appointment. You have to show up. And treating yourself and the commitments that you're making to yourself in the same way that you would make a commitment to somebody else. If you say that I'm going to meet with my advisor at 9 a.m. on Monday, you can also say to yourself, I'm going to show up for myself at 5 p.m. on Tuesday to do this set of reading. And so thinking about like what types of instigators do I use in order to make sure that I show up for other people, and also thinking about how it is that you can kind of instigate it so that it actually works for yourself and that you're making those commitments to yourself. But now we're going to go into like some like actual practical tips that have worked for us. So I'm going to let Danielle let us know some of her own ideas.
Yes, absolutely. So definitely agree with everything that you were saying, Kaylin. And one of the biggest tips that I have, and I find that it's the one that I want to talk about, like first and foremost, and I know Kaylin and I use it in different ways, is time blocking. And I definitely want to talk about it right now, about this like fake, I'm gonna say fake, post-COVID world that we're living in, because we're not post-COVID, but we kind of live life like we're post-COVID right now. Time blocking is so important. For anyone who's like, what in the world is time blocking? That's literally where you like take your schedule and you're like, okay, 9 to 5, from like 9 to this time, I'm going to do this. And then from this time to this time, I'm going to do this. And literally blocking out time for yourself to attend to your tasks, particularly when we have so many different tasks to attend to a day. It helps like check things off of your list, particularly if you have like weekly goals, like Kaylin was mentioning. We were just talking about goals for the month in one of the Accepted Society session planning sessions, and then how to break that down into each week. And then we keep each other accountable. But time blocking has become really important now too, with this whole like COVID world we're living in, because cannot tell you, I wish I had $1 for every conversation I've had about exhaustion this semester so far, because I would practically be a bajillionaire already, because of the fact that everyone I've talked to is so tired, because we've entered into this world of like, okay, we're all experiencing this collective stress associated with the pandemic in some way or another, depending on how we feel about it. And we are now being shoved back into society when we were told to avoid society for the last year and a half. We're constantly bombarded with news about the pandemic, and then things on top of that, like people going missing. We are just tired. And you don't realize how much mental energy it takes to not work just within your home until you're all of a sudden like, now you have to do this. You have to get yourself ready every day. You have to go and you have to interact. You have to play nice, quote unquote, with people. I consider myself pretty extroverted, and even I'm tired every day. And so time blocking has helped me, because I can't always work 24/7 like I used to. Well, within my definition of 24/7. So I have to build myself breaks where I'm like, okay, I'm going to take a 30-minute break in the middle of the day, because that's what I was doing when I was working at home. But having that time block allows me to build that in before starting something else. And you can do that with using like apps for that. There are plenty of apps out there to help you time block. Pomodoro timers, that's something that Kaylin and I use a ton in all the Accepted Society events, particularly when it comes to anything time that we're doing work together. For those who don't know what a Pomodoro is, you work for about a section of time and then you take a quick break. Usually it's like about 25 minutes, break for 5 minutes. And those time breaks are actually based on research and how much your brain can take in and how long you can focus on something. So I'll stop there. Kaylin, I'll let you take some of the rest of the tips before we wrap up the YouTube portion.
Yeah, I wanted to also like flag something that I didn't think we touched on, and I am really excited to actually get to talk about this with the group in a minute. But I also get so there's also a conversation there's a conversation in the academy about like you're supposed to be dedicated to your academic work all the time, but then in the kind of public discourse right now, it's also very like not popular to be somebody that is constantly productive. There's a lot of backlash against like the like romanticize your life kind of content, and the like especially academic YouTubers that show their kind of long stints of studying. And some people find it motivating, some people find it kind of as a negative space. And I think it's also like Danielle and I were talking about this earlier about how for me, like that, I actually really like the kind of romanticize your life kind of content, and it keeps me motivated, but it can also be very negative for certain people. But for me, it is very much also about the mindset and the boundaries that I set up for myself, and making sure that I am like, the self-talk isn't negative. It's not saying like, you have to do this because you're a bad student or you're worthless without it. It's saying like, I am tired. I don't necessarily want to do this right now, but I know that this contributes to my goal in the long term. So I'm going to do right by by myself, by my future self, as I like to say, and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do the work right now. So also thinking about how it is that you manage the conversations with like internally with yourself, but also how it is you approach conversations with your friends, because like we've spoken about, everybody is feeling this significant degree of exhaustion, either from staying at home or from returning to being in person. And one thing that often comes up in conversations is like we immediately go to the negative of how COVID and how being home has affected our energy. And it's often, the conversation also often starts with, I'm feeling exhausted or I'm really tired, versus like, and because that immediately brings the energy of the conversation down and it immediately kind of drains the energy out of the room. And so trying to think about like managing being able to speak about what you're going through, but also thinking about the positive end of like why it is that you're doing the things that you're doing. And there's a whole other like layer of talking about mental health and how that factors into those conversations and those boundaries. But the last thing that I'll kind of add is a lot of the like that thin line that we were talking about earlier between discipline and listen and like pushing yourself and potentially like putting like harming yourself by not giving yourself time to rest is really about like having a good check on yourself and where your energy tends to sit and how it is that you're caring for your body and how your awareness of the way that you're talking to yourself also. Because for me, the thin line when I'm being really disciplined, like I had a lot of issues with eating and eating disorders back when I was a professional athlete. And I know that it's slipping into being very harmful for myself when my discipline is also like feeding into the things that I'm eating and the way that I'm eating or perhaps not eating. And that's another, like, that's kind of like my like trigger point. I know that if I start having if I start kind of having internal thoughts where I'm avoiding food as a way of maintaining control and discipline, then it's slipping, like it's crossing a line. And that's where the thin line sits for me. But that's over like years and years and years of like having kind of kept check on what works for me and what doesn't, and trying to see where those boundary lines are. But it's different depending on who you are and what person you are. For me, I can study really late, and it actually, like, if I'm motivated and feeling really good about my life, it's actually a very good thing that I'm staying up late. And like I can tell in my mood that I'm like excited to do the work. And so that's why I'm staying up. However, like for Danielle, she really needs to go to bed. If she's staying up really late, it's actually harming her. So thinking about like what works for you and where that boundary line sits. Danielle, is there anything else you wanted to add to that point?
No, I mean, I would completely agree. Like defining those personal boundaries and not being apologetic for them. And it's really hard not to be apologetic for them. Perfect example is that something that I have learned for like my own mental health and my own sanity is that for the most part, I try not to work on Saturdays. I work all day Sunday, but I don't work on Saturdays because I need some sort of separation from it for that long-term goal, right? Because I'm in this marathon now. And because of that, that means that I will not do anything on Saturdays, but sometimes I have a hard time with it because that means that I'm putting others out because they reserve their Saturdays for things. But I've learned to be like, as long as I'm showing up with my best self on other days, that it's okay that I take that day. And we all have to find ways for that to work for yourself, and just know what those are and don't feel apologetic about it, because other people will define their own boundaries as well. So that would be my last few thoughts on that.
Absolutely. So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a private conversation with the members for Accepted Society that have joined us today. If you are watching from YouTube and you would like to get involved in the conversation in the future, then go ahead over to acceptedconsulting.com and check out Accepted Society. So that way you can join in. But thank you all so much for watching. We're going to go ahead